மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next tactic. This next one I actually had in a tournament game, pretty high-level tournament in the Pan American Intercollegiate Championships. I was playing, representing Webster University against UT Dallas. I was playing very strong Grandmaster Alexander Injic from Serbia. And in this game, we reached what's a known opening position, except I wasn't in my preparation, and I basically had to figure out the best approach over the board. So for this, I will kind of try and explain my thought process and kind of show what's required in terms of calculation and decision making. But as usual, let's start with the opening. It was a Queen's Indian setup from Black with e6 and b6. And against this setup, I usually enjoy playing this early c4. Given that White aims to be a bit more ambitious, control a bit more space. Of course, if you're maybe more comfortable playing a typical London setup with c3, knight d2, bishop d3, there's nothing wrong with that. But c4, a bit more ambitious in this game. My opponent played bishop e4 check. Now I played a slightly bizarre-looking move. I played knight fd2, which perhaps you don't see every day. Looks a lot more natural to play knight bd2 or knight c3. The idea with this move is that I want to preserve knight c3 for later. And first I want to kick away the bishop so I avoid any double pawns. So if we imagine, actually let's just go through with the game because that's what I do after castling an a3. If we imagine Black were to take the knight on d2 here, I would take back with queen, so then I can play knight c3. And I would have more optimal development with the pieces. So Injic did not take on d2. Instead, he played bishop to e7. I played knight c3. And then he played c5. And after this move, I was out of my preparation. It was in kind of a new position for me. I knew some ideas, but I did have to kind of figure out how to proceed in this position. So I do want to explain the issue for White here is that Black has a simple positional idea, is to take on d4, and after White takes back, Black wants to play d5, and basically force a position where White would then have an isolated pawn. So if, just to play this out, let's imagine I play some move like queen c2, Black is very happy to get this position where after the eventual trade of these pawns, Black will be able to play against the isolated d pawn for a long time in the resulting middle game and the eventual end game. So I realized that I did have to do something here. And the most thematic move and the move that White would like to play most often in this sort of situation where there's so much pawn tension is to play d5 and just gain space. But if we look at d5 currently, there are 3 attackers and only 2 defenders. However, because of the tactics which are present in this position, d5 is still the strongest move. And before I played d5, I did have to calculate pretty deeply. I had to calculate what happens after we trade and knight takes, or if we trade and bishop take. So now we'll go through the critical lines. I should mention at first, if Black doesn't take on d5, White is very happy to reinforce the center. Let's imagine Black plays a move, I don't know, like d6. Then White can very happily play e4, and this is just a better position for White with more space. So Black is pretty much obliged to test White in this line, but as we'll see, White will still come out on top with at least some advantage. So after e take d5, c take d5. Black can capture with either the bishop or the knight. And I will admit that I basically discarded bishop take d5 at first, and I only looked at knight take d5. My opponent actually played bishop take d5, which we'll get to, but first I do want to look at knight take d5, because then White has a very simple response, queen to f3. And with the pin against the knight, Black is actually losing material here. If we imagine knight take f4, White can then take on b7 with just hitting the rook and hitting the knight still on f4, and White's just going to be out material. So going back, my opponent surprised me and took on d5. And at first I thought this was just a simple tactical mistake because it looks like white can take, and queen f3. However, there is a trick for black because after knight c7, which was played in the game, I can't go ahead and play the simple bishop takes c7, queen takes c7, and then queen take a8 because of knight c6. And my queen is actually getting trapped on a8. I would have to take on f8, king take f8. And if we're counting material, black has a queen and pawn for 2 rooks, but white's not completed with development, and it's not clear who's better here. If anyone, black is probably better. So going back, knight take d5 was kind of an interesting moment because after queen f3, knight c7, it's a question, how do I get compensation for the pawn that I've sacrificed? And now there's a very strong move for white, which I will admit I did not calculate when I played the move d5 initially. But if you would like, please pause your video and find the strongest continuation for white in this position. Okay, so the move is queen to b7, which simply puts the queen in the heart of black's position and attacks the knight, which is currently tied down to defending the rook. And after queen b7, white simply keeps initiative, and it becomes very difficult for black to keep everything defended. I do want to go forward and show how I not only won back material, but got a very pleasant advantage. d6 was pretty much the only move to obstruct the bishop from attacking the knights. And I continued to add pressure, knight to c4, and I'm already threatening moves like rook d1 or casting queenside, applying more pressure to the d6 pawn. So black had to play somewhat actively here. He played the move b5. But then I go ahead and I take on d6, which is a nice tactical sequence because after bishop take d6, I castle queenside with the pin on the d file and hitting the bishop on d6, which is now attacked twice. Can't really be defended. So after queen c8, we traded queens. I win the bishop. And we have a position where it is equal material, but white has so much more activity. And going forward here, actually use my piece activity to win a pawn in just a few more moves. We can see black is incredibly passive. And there's a nice counterattacking move here. Instead of moving the rook from d6, I played bishop to f3, attacking the rook on a7, and after on a8, excuse me. And after knight take d6, bishop take a8, knight c6. We trade bishop for knights, and I eventually won the pawn on c5. And then it was everything to play for in the endgame, white having an extra pawn. Sadly, I was not able to convert the position because my opponent put up some incredible resistance. I was winning at some point, but I will leave it to the viewers to take a look further to perhaps analyze endgame. And perhaps I need to develop some sort of endgame course in the future to talk about how to convert positions like these. But I hope that was instructive, especially in the sense that this sort of structure in the London you don't see every day. Especially most London structures don't feature this pawn on c4. But knowing this d5 idea and looking for ways to make it work out tactically can lead to simply a better positional game, as we saw here. And we also see the overlap between tactical chess and positional chess when sometimes it's necessary to use tactics to increase positional advantages. And the two overlap so often in so many different openings and middle games. So hope you guys enjoyed that, and I will be back for another lesson.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.